good afternoon, everybody. I'm happy to see you all here to join us this afternoon for the 2024 showcase of select paintings from the 19th century art collection. This year our theme is Stewardship and Restoration. My name is Pat Benjamin, and I'm the chair of the Art and Inventory Subcommittee. Our current committee members include Edie Schaefer, Trudy Doyle, Wynne Garulot, Sarah Payton, Diane Stevenson, and Bob Trezevant. And I want to thank all the committee members for all the work on various projects they've done throughout the year, including preparation for and participation in today's program. I also want to thank Ray Ward, the club's managing director, Becky Grajeda, administrative assistant, for their support in countless ways that I know about and that I don't know about, because I know things go on behind the scenes. And to John Roberts and Ed Pitts, our videographers behind the camera and the microphones for this event. So speaking of videos, I wanted to let you know there's a newly edited version of last year's art showcase on the NCCA website. And I want to thank Bob Trezevant for arranging what we're calling the director's cut, the best of the video. And a reminder that today's program will appear there in the near future, and that's in the member section of the website under the heading Mr. Program. And if you've never looked at this section, I highly recommend that you check it out, because there's a lot of excellent videos of the programs that have been offered here at the club. And I've also recently learned, like in the last 10 minutes, that we have a YouTube channel that you can also check for the videos. So here's an overview of today's program. First, I'm going to say a few words about the work of the Art and Inventory Subcommittee and the oil painting restoration project. Then there's going to be a video about the nuts and bolts of painting restoration, which was made by one of the restorers who worked on our own paintings. Then we'll hear about 3 paintings from the 19th century collection and about their artists. And finally, we're going to break for refreshments and invite you to walk around the member lounge to take a closer look at the paintings. They're going to be up here, but you'll see a lot more if you look at them up closer. And the restored paintings have red ribbons hanging on them. So by default, the ones that haven't been restored. So you'll see that. And then presenters will be stationed by their paintings for any questions or comments that you might have. So the work of the Art and Inventory Subcommittee is to keep track of and take care of the artwork, furniture, and other objects that are inside of the 19th century clubhouse. Many of these items have historical significance to the 19th century club and to the greater Oak Park community. And a few, probably more than a few, have some monetary value. All of them contribute to the atmosphere of the rooms where meetings take place, where members gather, and where the community comes to enjoy our landmark building. The Art and Inventory Subcommittee was formed about 5 years ago, the brainchild of Edie Schaefer. At that time, there was no proper inventory of the items in the building. This was a problem for insurance purposes, but also in terms of stewardship of our assets. Basically, there was no clear record of what we had. And many of it was stuffed in closets and down in the pool and, elsewhere in the building. We had no idea of what exactly we had. Edie also noticed that many things were looking a little worse for wear, and that they needed to be not only inventoried and evaluated, but in many instances, either repaired, restored, or in some cases, cleaned out. Some of the artwork and furniture you see around here, especially in the member lounge, is 100 years old and was here when the building opened in February of 1928. Some was acquired even earlier, when members were still meeting in each other's homes. And much of it was beginning to look pretty shabby in 2019. After decades of use, time had taken its toll. So it was time to be good stewards of the treasures that were passed down to us. And so the Art and Inventory Subcommittee of the Buildings and Grounds Committee came into being. Now, it's good to keep in mind that the 19th Century Club is not a museum, but a landmark building, including its furnishings, with a lot of history worthy of preservation, even as it functions today as a center for learning and giving back to the community. A good part of the attraction of the 19th century venue today is the comfortable, warm, and yet somewhat formal feeling of the space. The member lounge is much like living rooms of the founding members, where meetings were originally held prior to 1928. There's a fireplace, artwork on the walls, comfortable furniture to sit in, spaces to gather, and even a piano for entertainment, which would have been a feature in a lot of those homes back in the day. The women who envisioned the clubhouse in the 1920s deliberately chose 18th century English for its design and expression. There is a hint of formality and elegance, and yet the rooms are comfortable and restful. Any event taking place in these spaces is elevated by the character of these rooms. That's anything from regular meetings to book club to mahjong and to programs like this, as well as rentals that come in for other occasions. Now, the oil paintings and the furniture are a major part of this in setting the tone of this space. And that includes this newly renovated podium, which I hope you'll come up and take a look at when we break for refreshments. It was pretty beat up about a month ago. It's been fully restored. And it was used by many a club member over the years, and also a host of notable speakers in the past. The podium was up in the ballroom for many years, but now resides here on the first floor. And we think it might date from those earliest days in the 1920s. There are 19 oil paintings in the NCCA art collection, and most are in the member lounge. In 1928, when their new clubhouse opened, May Estelle Cook, a 19th century women's club charter member, was quoted in the Oak Leaves as saying, quote, "Pictures we had owned for years and not been able to enjoy reappeared, and others given by friends of the club and our own artist members found appropriate places on the wall." So they were able to bring them out of storage and put them up in their own living room here. There's a photo in the Oak Leaves from 1928 showing two of the oil paintings hanging in the lounge, although I suspect there were more, they just didn't end up in the picture. And that was 39 years after the club was founded in 1891. So there was time to accumulate a lot of artwork, which was a major interest of early club members. Most oil paintings in the current collection were probably done in the early 1900s, although one or two may even be from the late 1800s. Some were painted by early 19th century club members, some by leading local artists of the day, and some of the artists were prominent in the early days of the Oak Park Art League. and have national and international recognition. In 2002, an evaluation by local art historian Wendy Greenhouse put the value of our oil painting collection at around $40,000. That was 2 decades ago, and before we did a lot of restoration on the paintings. So I'm thinking that it's probably worth quite a bit more than that today. So the oil painting restoration project began in 2022 with a $500 grant from the Oak Park Arts Council. To date, we've gotten a total of $5,500 from the council, and I want to thank all the people involved in getting those grants, including Marianne Prushnik and Ray Ward and Becky, who did a lot of the filling out of the applications. And there's been an additional $6,750 from member donations specifically targeted for these restoration projects. And by the way, if you're interested in donating to the restoration efforts, you could talk to me or Becky after the program and see how that might be done. So 10 oil paintings and most of the frames have already been restored at the cost of $9,350. The wooden podium was recently refinished, like we got it back last week, for $800. And in the lounge, there are red ribbons on the paintings that have already been restored, so you can identify them as you walk around during the refreshment period and whenever you come in to enjoy the space. The projected completion of the oil painting restoration project is 2027, we hope, in time for the celebration of the 100th anniversary of the clubhouse opening in 1928. So I'm sorry to throw all those figures at you, but I thought, it gives you an idea of, what it takes to restore oil paintings. Oh, and now, before we hear about the featured oil paintings for today, we have a video that talks about the restoration project, shows the restoration process itself. The video happened to be made by Julian Baumgartner, who has restored several of our own paintings. And it walks us through repair of a painting called Ironworkers, which we don't own, but it was missing paint and had a lot of canvas problems. And the repairs are very similar to what was done with our own paintings. And you'll see that the process of restoring paintings takes a lot of knowledge, a good eye, a lot of patience, and a lot of skill. So I'm going to ask Becky now to roll the tape, as they say.
So for this video, we're going to take a look at the conservation process for a piece by Reginald Marsh. This is a piece of social realism that has seen a little bit better days. It's quite dirty, as you can see. There are some punctures and some tears, and generally the painting has lost its luster under accumulated surface grime, old varnish, and a bit of linseed oil. So this video is going to walk us through the conservation process. Now keep in mind, this is not meant to be instructive or comprehensive. There's a lot that I had to leave out because it's just not filmable or not very interesting, but hopefully this will give you an idea of just what goes into the process of conservation. So the first step, once I take it off the wall, is to get the painting off of the stretcher. And this painting is held onto the stretcher using steel tacks. And these tacks are pretty well embedded into the wood, as you can see, and I have to take great care because the canvas is really quite brittle. Over time, this canvas dries out and it gets really brittle, and if you're not careful, you can tear the canvas, and that definitely isn't a good thing. So working slowly and deliberately, I'll remove all of these tacks, and then once I'm finished, I can remove the painting from the stretcher. Now again, I have to be very careful because the canvas is kind of bonded to the stretcher. As I lift it up, I notice that some of the corners are really stuck in there, so I'll go carefully and just remove the stretcher. Now, the next step is to remove all of the dirt and the grime that settles behind the stretcher bar in between the canvas and the stretcher. This is mostly just dust and dirt, but you can see there's some wood particles and other debris. I want to get all of that stuff off. Now, this painting has a label on the back from the Whitney Studio Club, which was the precursor to the Whitney Museum. Saving this label is paramount. If this label gets lost, even though the painting is signed on the front, we lose a lot of information. We have the title, we have the price paid, we have the address of the artist, and most importantly, this is a direct link to the artist and validates that the painting was by him. So what I'm going to do is take the painting and using some adhesive, a reversible adhesive, I'm going to mount it onto a new piece of acid-free 8-ply mat board. And the reason I'm going to do that is because this label, as you can see, has already been through quite a bit and was almost lost. And we definitely want to make sure that it stays with the painting. So now the next step is the cleaning process. And using a detergent that I make, I'm going to slowly start working in confined areas to loosen up the surface grime. And the reason I work in confined areas is twofold, really. One, it allows me to control how much of the painting I'm cleaning at any given time. And also, by working within the visual boundaries of the image, I can ensure that no part of the painting gets cleaned twice or over-cleaned. So you can see the surface grime coming off, and right there you can see just how bright the painting is going to be. Now this is just the surface grime. To take off the varnish and the old linseed oil, I'll use a mixture of solvents. I roll these swabs myself, and in a minute you'll see just how much of the old varnish and the linseed oil comes off when I roll the swab. So there you can see just how much more grime is on the painting. A couple of dirty swabs. So with that section fully cleaned, I can go on to another section. And here again, I'm just using a stiff bristle brush and the paste that I mixed to loosen up that surface grime. And then once that's sufficiently loose, I will use another swab that I roll and I'll remove the old varnish. Now this one, because there was an old linseed oil layer on top of it, I had to go back in with another swab and clean off some of that residual yellow. Now with the painting about half cleaned, you can see just how dramatic the transformation will be. Because this painting had some waves and ripples in it, the next step is to flatten it. And this is done on my big hot table, which is an aluminum table with a heating element embedded underneath and a vacuum pump attached. I make a sandwich of Mylar, the painting, and some cotton blotter paper. I'll turn the heat on, turn the ramp rate of the heat on, and adjust the heat temperature. And then I will even the painting out as the pressure is applied. Now here I'm using a light touch and a wooden roller just to encourage the painting flat. And I'll go back in with a bone folder just to make sure that all of the little ripples are out and make sure that the painting is going to get even pressure. Now this is going to remove the cracks and the waves and the ripples from the canvas. This canvas had a couple of small punctures, and I'm going to take a piece of the corner and I'm going to use that to fill in the missing canvas. The reason I use the piece of existing canvas as opposed to something from my stock is that this is the same pH, it's the same age, it's the same weave, and it has the same gesso layer on it. So here I'm using a thermoplastic adhesive. It's a powder that I will put in and around the area that needs to be secured. And then using a piece of silicone release film and a tacking iron, I will fuse that powder with the canvas. And this is going to hold that little fill-in onto the canvas. Now what I'm cutting here is silk organza, which is a very fine silk fabric, and it's incredibly strong, and I use it to reinforce the tacking edges. These tacking edges are pretty strong, but after about 80 or 90 years of being creased, they can get a little brittle, and I want to make sure that when they go back onto the stretcher and the tacks are put in, that we don't get any tears or any weak spots. So with all of the tacking edges secured, I will start to fit the painting to the stretcher, and then using steel upholstery tacks, I will begin restretching the painting. Now on this painting, I'm not using a pulling pliers, I'm just using my fingers because I don't need a ton of pressure or tension, and it gives me a softer, more accurate touch. Now these little wedges are called keys, and when I put them in the corner and I tap, if you watch closely, you can see that joint expand. Here you go. There you go. You see how it expands? That adds tension to the canvas. And here, I'm just using some fishing line and another tack to secure those keys so that they don't fall out. If they fall out, they can be lost, but worse, they can fall in between the canvas and the stretcher bar and create a bulge. Now, there was some paint loss on this painting, and so I'm using the light to see where the losses are. And then using a putty, I will fill in those losses and make sure that the texture is the same, the surface is the same as the surrounding area. And ultimately, when it's dry, I will go back with some swabs and remove the excess because I just want where the missing pigment is to be filled in. I don't want to build up a lot of putty. Now, people are going to say, why aren't you using gloves? This is why, because the best feel is with my fingers, and if I had gloves on, I wouldn't be able to feel the surface. A little bit of mineral spirits will wipe off any residue and allow me to see what the painting will look like once it's varnished. So it's kind of a way of, quote, oiling out the painting without using oil. And so here I'm using conservation pigments, which are archival and fully reversible, and I'm just adding pigment where pigment was lost. And this is a slow process. It takes a lot of passes. You mix a little bit of color and you lay it on, and then you mix some more color and you lay it on. And in this case, I have to simulate the brushwork of the artist. So I'm adding some highlights in there. And once the entire painting has been retouched, I will let it sit for a couple days, come back to it, take a second pass at it, make sure I didn't miss anything. And if I did, I'll continue. Now, that label got mounted, got wrapped in plastic film, and is now getting screwed to the stretcher with brass screws. And this is a piece of acid-free foam core. And the reason that I'm putting that on is twofold. One, it protects the back of the painting from debris, from incident like being banged into something. And also, it limits the amount of flex that the canvas has. When you create a kind of a chamber that's sealed, the canvas isn't going to flex so much as it's moved or as the humidity changes. So into my back room where I am going to varnish the painting. And this painting I'm going to use a two-step varnishing process. First one, I'm going to brush the varnish on with a just big old thick bristle hair brush. Gives me a lot of coverage. The brush holds a lot of varnish, so I don't need to recharge it. And I'm just going to take my time and go front to back, left to right, up, down, just making sure I have even coverage across the whole painting. And then you'll see that I go around the edges on the final pass. Here we go. And I'm just making sure that anything that pooled on the edges is removed. Now, after that varnish dries, I take the same varnish, but a glossier version, and I spray it from a little bit higher than recommended. And what I want is to get adequate coverage of the painting, but I want some of that shiny varnish to start to dry as it hits the painting, which gives me kind of a crystal-y effect. So here's the painting before conservation, and here's the painting after conservation. The video doesn't really capture the surface sheen and how great it looks, how velvety, but you can see that there's a lot more color, there's a lot more detail. All of the deflections, the holes, the waves, the ripples have been adjusted and taken care of. And this painting is now stable and secure for the next 100 or so years. Any of the work that I've done can be removed by the next conservator, and nothing that I've done is permanent or potentially harmful to the painting. So, thanks for watching.
So if you were wondering what costs so much to restore a painting, you could see all that goes into the process. And many of our paintings that were restored, as I said, were about 100 years old, or 90 years old, 85 years old. And so they needed this kind of care given to them. So now we're going to hear about 3 paintings from our collection and learn a little more about their artists. The paintings will be brought up to the front of the room while the presenters are talking about them. And then they're going to be put back on the wall in the member lounge so that during the refreshment period, as you're walking around the member lounge, you can take a lot closer look at them. So Sarah Patton is first up, and she's going to tell us about the painting we're calling Skating Scene, although it didn't have an official name, anywhere on it. and it's by Edna Austin.
Well, Edna Lee Harris Austin is an interesting person because she lived right here almost. And she was born on February 14th in 1879 in Fergus Falls, Otter Trail County in Minnesota. And then she came to Oak Park in 1902, and I don't know what brought her here, but she came and she taught elementary schools here. It was about 2 years, and then she married Henry W. Austin in 1904. Now, he's the son of the man who came here to begin with and to get Oak Park going in a way. I want to say a little bit about Henry. He wasn't a painter, but I just wanted to give you a little background about him. He was born in January 22nd in 1864, and he died in June 25, 1947. And he attended Oak Park and Chicago Public Schools and attended Williams College. He served as president of Oak Park Trust and Savings Bank. He also served as a president in Cicero, Illinois School Board, interestingly enough, and as a treasurer of the village of Oak Park. He served in the Illinois House of Representatives from 1903 to 1909, and the Illinois Senate from 1915 to 1923. So that's about him, but I'm going to focus back on his wife. They had 3 children: Wallace Austin, Marion Austin Fisher, and Louis Francis Austin. So they had 3 children. Now, they lived in Oak Park, and I'm going to pass it along so you can see the house that they lived in to begin with, which was close to where the theater is. And then they moved it to where we have our I guess it's this way, our garden and Austin Garden, that's right. So, but you can see it's not a great picture, but it gives you a look at their house. They moved the house, believe it or not. They took the house and moved it, which was quite interesting because that area, it was set near where the theater is, the Lake Theater, and then they took it. So it's interesting to hear a little bit about how our Oak Park, how it was back in this era. She was a very active person. She was a member of the First Congregational Church of Oak Park, a lifetime member of West Suburban Auxiliary, Oak Park and River Forest and Austin Art League, a life member and past president of the 19th Century Club, which is probably when she brought her painting here. Now, it's an interesting painting. I have found other paintings, but she wasn't. I think they're at the Oak Park League, but I didn't get into that. But it's interesting. She was obviously a very interesting person and went in many different ways. She was active in community lectures, civic theater, and the Oak Park Orchestra Symphony. She was also active in Chicago organizations. And in addition, she was involved in international affairs. She founded the Oak Park Council of International Affairs, served on the board of the Immigrant Protective League, and supported, we need her back, don't we? And supported the building of a chapel for the YMCA of Jerusalem. She also was engaged in painting, and I wanted to tell you a little bit more of what other things she did. She also, and I have to say this because I was in charge of the Oak Park and River Forest Day Nursery. That was a job I had for a while, and she was also involved in that, and that really made my day, knowing that she was part of that. So She did quite a lot with her life, and she died on July 13th, 1964, at the age of 85, which was a nice long life in that era. And Edna and her husband, and I'm going to try to go see them because they're buried at Forest Home Cemetery in Forest Park. So we need to go at some point because to see them and honor them. So this is the skating scene. She was a little blurred, but I kind of liked that. And it's too bad that the house was demolished, but I guess that was just, a lot of the older homes. Yeah. Okay.
So I just want to comment that I mentioned the video of last year's program that's on the website. This painting was also shown on that video right to the end, like the last, 8 or 9 minutes. Edie Schaefer was talking about Edna, and you can see the before the restoration. So this restoration was done in the last year, and it just brightened it up like crazy. So you can see it needed a lot of cleaning. So our next painting we're calling Summer Landscape by Alfred Juergens, and the presentation will be by Trudy Doyle.
Before I begin, I'd like to credit Edward Bentley of the Illinois Historical Art Project, whose research I have relied upon in preparing this presentation. So, Alfred Juergens was born in Chicago in 1866, and he died in his Oak Park home in 1934. And the title of the painting, as you heard, is Summer Landscape. Our newly restored painting by Alfred Juergens depicts a lush garden with a barely visible solitary figure tending to the paintings. Puffy white clouds float above a perfect blue sky. I have to add that when I was walking in downtown Oak Park yesterday, and I had been certainly looking at Alfred's painting and reading this about the perfect blue sky, we had that in Oak Park yesterday, and I looked up and I thought, it's an Alfred sky. It's painted on board, and the painting is mounted in a simple frame, which complements the work and was likely built by the artist himself. He built many of his own frames. This is one of many landscape paintings by Juergens in the American Impressionism style. In his works, the rapidly applied brushstroke communicate not the specific appearance of flowers, but rather a generalized impression of rich texture and brilliant color. He's best known for his paintings of landscape and still life in both oils and watercolor. Over his long career, his mural paintings and portraits were also well received. But his greatest accomplishments were in the bright colors, outdoor light effects, and broken brushwork associated with American Impressionism. Regarding his early access to painting, Juergens commented, "You might say I was born in a paint pot. You see, my father was in the paint business. That furnished me with the proper environment and helped to encourage my desire to be an artist." His mother, Wilhelmine, was a devoted supporter of Alfred's art throughout her life and his. However, his father, Ludwig, also insisted that Alfred must work as a clerk in the family paint business as a condition of his attendance at the Chicago Academy of Design, later named the Art Institute of Chicago. And also, his illustrious art career, covering over 50 years, began then in 1881 at the age of 15. Following his father's sudden death in 1883, Alfred's mother, Wilhelmine, proceeded with plans for Alfred to study art at the Royal Academy in Munich, Germany. He began as a student there in 1886. A tradition, as taught at the Royal Academy, was landscapes were to be painted in the studio from sketches done on site. Jurgens followed this principle of sketching throughout his career. Incidentally, two boxes identified as Alfred Jurgens' sketchbook circa 1897 are presently in the archives at the Art Institute of Chicago. A favorite subject of Jurgens' landscape paintings were the many beautiful gardens in his hometown. At an appearance with several other Chicago area artists before the Oak Park 19th Century Women's Club on the occasion of their visit to the Art Institute of Chicago, Jurgens had this to say about the value of our local scenery. We in Oak Park don't have to go 1,000 miles to come on our beauty spots. There are no more lovely gardens anywhere than those in our village. Jurgens returned to Munich in 1894 to reconnect with his friends and rekindle the encouragement that he had known there. On the way, he stopped in the Netherlands, where he spent several months studying the artwork of the Hague School before continuing on to Germany. There he participated in a number of exhibitions and received several significant awards. It was during this time that the medium of watercolor became one of his favorites. Alfred returned from Munich in 1898 and settled into his family's beautiful new home in Oak Park. The spacious home has large windows, which allowed the daylight to pour into his second-floor studio. His colorful local landscape brought Jurgens recognition and many prestigious awards. And because of his work as an artist, exhibitor, speaker, and jurist, as well as his support of the art scene in Chicago and the Midwest, he was quite visible and celebrated during his long career. He often traveled to visit artists and museums in Wisconsin and Michigan, and his work became part of collections throughout the Midwest. In an article about Alfred Jurgens' appearance before the Grand Rapids Art Association, a sponsor of the event commented, "It is interesting to know what pains Mr. Jurgens takes with his frames. Many of them he carved himself, and at least designed most of them. He has achieved a unity between frame and painting, which is oftentimes sadly lacking." In 1921, working with a group of other local artists, Alfred Jurgens was one of the founders of the Oak Park Art League. And in 1932, the league became a tenant of the newly completed 19th Century Women's Club, renting the top floor. Alfred Jurgens died from a heart attack on April 19, 1934, at his Oak Park residence at 213 South Grove. At the time of his death, or a little bit later, the Chicago Tribune had this to say: at the first retrospective of his exhibit of the artist's work, actually Eleanor Jewett gave this summary of his life's production. Jurgens' work in Munich reflected the current tendency toward dark tonal painting with a strong emphasis on light and shadow. Gradually, his palette became lighter, and delicate effects of atmosphere and color replaced the dark tones of his earlier works. He concentrated on out-of-door subjects and flowers, which he handled with the exquisiteness of brush that recalls the French Impressionists. As his many friends have testified, Jurgens loved nature in all its varied moods and spent hours of his time outdoors. A devout man, he saw the world as God's universe, and in his work felt he was communing with nature, painting it as he saw and experienced. And Richard Norton of Norton Galleries in Chicago said of the artist, "Some artists are really painters, and they paint pictures to make a living. Other painters are really artists, and they paint what they really want to paint." Jurgens was one of the latter.
All right, I just wanted to point out, Trudy mentioned the frame. And this frame, we just got the painting back last week after the painting had been restored, like a month earlier. But the frame we sent back to be restored. It looked like somebody had taken a hammer to it. It was really in bad shape. And so in this case, the frame cost more than the painting to restore. But given that the artist probably designed that frame, it's really part of the package. And so, anyway, yeah, so you can take a good look at that, minus the hammer marks. Edie Schaefer is going to present a painting called Tall Pines, and you'll see why there's a lot of tall pines in it, by Walter Sargent.
Hi. Thanks for all coming. I appreciate it. So the one in the center is Tall Pines, and as you probably know already, it's about 100 years old. It was painted in 1922, and we're not sure when it arrived or came, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. So as you can tell, the painting is quite dark, and it's actually brighter now that it's under this light, but it is 100 years old, and the varnish has gotten older. So it is planned for a cleaning for next year. So, and does anybody want to take a wild guess what that's going to cost? $2,500. That's with the frame and the painting as well, because that's all gold. So, so this oil painting by Walter Sargent is called Tall Pines. Although it is dark, you can see that it is an Impressionist painting. And Impressionist paintings were not meant to be an exact copy, of course, just like a photograph. Walter Sargent came of age during the Impressionist peak. And I want to just put the other one up, which is by Luciano Torsi, and we talked about that last year, but I just wanted you to notice the difference between them a little bit, because the Tall Pines, you almost feel like you're sitting right there, right? It's so close, the trees are big and huge, and the other one, it's like a long path. You see a wider landscape, don't we? So I just wanted to notice that, just because of the difference between those two Impressionist paintings. And here we see a dense forest of tall evergreens, possibly in the winter, which fills the space. The blue sky is barely visible through the tightly packed pine branches. The sloping forest floor is golden, suggesting that the summer is over. Old pine needles littering the ground. You can imagine that the sun is setting, hence the dark colors, along with the long shadows of the trees stretching across the forest floor. A major aspect of the painting is the play of the dark and the light, and I'm sure that we'll see more of that once the paintings are clean. So what is different about Sargent between him and other painters is that he was just not painting for the pleasure of it. He was trying to analyze the paint, the color. He wanted to understand what makes the colors that he needs to use to paint a picture. He was also a teacher, so he needed to be able to explain to students how to do that. So he didn't mean when he talks about color, when I think about color, when he says color, and that came out in a lot of his books and all this color. So when I think of color, I'm thinking of blue, green, yellow, right? All the big, bright colors. But that's not what he meant. He meant that the painter should look for the colors in their hue, their value, and intensity, but also in the illumination. So if we take this picture and put it somewhere else, we're going to look at those colors differently, aren't we? They're going to be different than what they are in a different place that's illuminated by the sun. So imagine yourself, and this is what I had to do, imagine yourself picking out paint, and you're in the store looking at all the different variations of the colors, right? Look at all the blues and the yellows and the greens. They're all different. And how do they get those colors? They get them because they blend the colors with black or yellow or green. They blend the different colors, and that's what he was talking about. So this is the book he wrote. It was called The Enjoyment and Use of Color. I found it on Etsy, and so I bought this, and it's going to be donated to the club. So it'll be here for your enjoyment and to look at it. Here's another book that I want to show you, and this one is called Walter Sargent, Landscape Artist and the Art Educator. It's by Carol Miles, and I got this as a gift from Carol Miles. She is a great-grand-niece in-law of Walter Sargent, and I talked with her on the phone, and she was so excited that we were talking about his painting that she sent me a book and a note to us at the club. So this will also be part of our collection. So Walter Sargent was a painter, a teacher, a lecturer, and author of 4 books and many, many articles in nationally known teachers' magazines for elementary and high schools. And finally, he was a professor and a school administrator. Sargent was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, shortly after the Civil War in 1868. He had a talent for art from an early age. He was encouraged by many to pursue his natural talent. He graduated from the Massachusetts Normal Art School and then toured Europe. Of course, where would you go if you're an Impressionist painter? You go to Paris and you go to Europe. So that's where he went. He spent 6 years there studying. The only problem was that his father was a minister out east, and they were kind of poor. And so he had to support himself while he was in Europe. The problem was that he was really so poor that he was living on bananas the last few months of his life over there, and he ended up being very sickly. So he finally got home, and it took him 3 months to recover. Following his trip and recovery, he met and married Emma Florence Bailey, and by 1903 he was made state supervisor of manual arts and director of manual training and drawing in the Boston schools. So you're probably wondering how we got this, right? Well, we're not sure, but we have a kind of an idea. 1 year before the founding of the 19th Century Club, the University of Chicago was opened. The first University of Chicago president was William Rainey Harper. There's actually a building now named after him, you probably know. And he valued adding art to the education of the curriculum. Whether it was Egyptology, medieval, or American art, he didn't care. He wanted it there. He had plans to establish an art center to supplement the work of the Art Institute of Chicago. He wanted to make Chicago a leader in art throughout the country. I think he's probably done pretty well with that, hasn't he? So I'm assuming that the President Harper read about Walter Sargent from the many articles he wrote in the educational magazines that he was writing in. Sargent was then called to Chicago, to the university, to bring the Department of History of Art and the School of Education all under one roof for the Department of Art. Sargent arrived in Chicago from Massachusetts and rented a home in Hyde Park at 5717 Kenwood. While working at the University of Chicago, he gave speeches in Oak Park, and another one, well, there were many. I couldn't even find them all. But he also gave a speech in Streator, Illinois. Can you imagine going all 80 miles away from Chicago? So I have proof that he actually spoke here in the 19th century because About a year ago, I found these cards, and there were 2 or 3 file boxes of all of these little cards, 3x5 cards. And on them are all of our speakers from like 1925 till 1977, and I typed them all up. So when I searched this, I didn't even remember. There were like, I don't know, 200, I don't know, hundreds. And one was Sergeant. So this one says, Sergeant Walter, on January 10th of 1927, he talked about types of painting, and it was illustrated. So we know that he was here in January of 27. Our president at the time was Annie P. Cook, and I got this off the wall. This is Annie P. Cook. That's her in 1927. So she was probably the person who encouraged him to come and talk. Luckily, he did speak here at that time because, unfortunately, he passed away the same year in September. He had heart trouble as well, so he passed away. But they had an auction, and this is something else that Carol Miles told me, is that they had an auction of his paintings for the community. I'm not sure where it was held, but there was no life insurance and probably no pension. I'm not even sure there was Social Security, but it probably would have been quite small. So they sold his paintings, and she was to receive those funds for her lifetime. So it would help out a little bit because he died so early at 59. So that may be when the painting came to us. It could have been a member who purchased it and gave it to us, or maybe she just decided to leave it here with us. We don't know, but it was around 1927. So just some honorable mentions. He became an affiliate of the New York University in 1925, and he was selected to be a member of the advisory board to the Carnegie Educational Foundation of New York. And before his passing in 1927, he was awarded an honorary degree of Doctor of Arts by Brown University. Just a little aside, one of his paintings was sold at Sotheby's for $10,000. Now, most of the ones that I've seen on Google, if I just Google them, they're worth maybe between $250 and a couple $1,000s. So, of course, value of painting is all different compared to, when who likes them, who wants to pay that kind of money. So that's what it is. But anyway, he is finally, his artworks are displayed in the David and Alfred Smart Gallery at the University of Chicago, the Hood Museum at Dartmouth, Western College, and Mount Holyoke College and Worcester Academy. And I just want to thank you for your patience and interest, and thank you very much.
That was so interesting. and all of the speakers are learned a lot about the paintings. These paintings, we look at them all the time, and a lot of times we just don't see them. They're just there. But now hopefully with a little more information, a little more awareness of them, you'll enjoy them more as you inhabit the space here at the 19th Century Club. Up near the ballroom, the curio cabinet has a little display with some signs that talk about the artists. And there's pictures of the artists. So if you want to see that, at some point when you're in the club, that'll be up for at least a month. And hopefully you have time to wander around the lounge to look at the paintings a little closer, especially the restored paintings. So thank you for coming. And please have some cookies and some cider.